White, a white cold desert. There is nothing for mankind in this place. There are so many places to explore and exploit. Have we already exploited everything on this planet? Unless this is the very last option we can imagine. And there is something we are trying to escape from. Since the dawn of time, humans have been influenced by roads, be it their appearance or their clothing, by determining where one could go and one could not go. This forged human evolution for millennia, if not more. And at a period where human evolution next step seems to be in the star, through space exploration, more and more attention has shifted towards the Arctic, not only for its commercial availability, such as maritime trading routes, but also for its resource richness, a wealth that is yet to be fully exploited. But let's get back to Japan and Russia and understand where those two fits. Since a traumatic defeat, Arctic has been seen as a life-saving road towards victory. The impossibility for the Baltic Fleet to quickly reach Port Arthur and Japan through Arctic was part of the reason of the defeat of Russia. And since then, since this extremely traumatic event of a colonial power losing against what was seen at this period as indigenous, soon to be colonized, this defeat has cemented the idea that Russia should be more than a continental state, but also a maritime state. Unfortunately, Soviet revolution troubles, as well as the Second World War, didn't left Soviet Union with a titanic marine. However, in the recent years, Russia has invested more and more in the Arctic, not only because of ice melting, but also because it is seen as a necessity for a state that also has more and more Asian ambition as global attention shift more and more towards Indo-Pacific, and thus having the ability to switch from one ocean to the other is seen as essential. Thus, Russia has invested quite a lot into different infrastructure, from resource exploitation such as the one on Yamal Peninsula, where gas and oil are exploited already. But this is also visible in investments such as more modern nuclear icebreaker to let fleet pass, but also the simple idea of reinforcing the Northern Fleet. And even though Russia has never been known for being a maritime power, this is not a problem for its doctrine, as Russia, unlike United States, which has a doctrine of projection, allowing its fleets to sail over every seas. For Russia, it is more important to defend the territory, thus leaving us with the doctrine of the bastion. However, this policy creates tension to some extent. Russia is not the only concurrent state in the region, and its act has often led to conflict with other states, such as with Norway. For example, when Russia asked for the extension of its EEZ regarding the continental plateau. And strange for a country like Russia, who doesn't often follow international rules, but still this is a sign that Russia invests more and more and wants to be a sort of dominant power in the region. And regarding its relation to Japan, it is something quite important because Japan invests in the region, or at least invested until more recent US sanction. And since Shinzo Abe's mandate ended and Ukraine war, not much has been accomplished yet. Still, this leaves many open doors for collaboration with Japan. Not to mention that United States, with its current, let's not euphemize, extremely hostile foreign policy towards its allies, tend to alienate them and make them find other opportunities with sometimes unthinkable states. Therefore, this is a topic to include in strategic foresight, I believe. To conclude on Russian part of this video, this is of course a sign that Russia understands Arctic as its own private land, to say the least, and as a tool of power, a tool to regain a place on international scene that Russia imagines as its most legitimate place, and future only will tell us how well Russia shall do in this area. Decidedly, history is made out of trauma, and even those who are very recent can influence foreign policy. Recent conflict with Iran from the United States have left maritime traffic extremely uncertain, not to mention what happened in Gaza and in Yemen. Therefore, for many industrialized countries, it is a necessity to find other routes towards their providers. This is the case for Japan, which depends almost entirely exclusively for many of its products on importation. Therefore, finding more secure routes is necessary, and thus Arctic route is seen as something safer, as you can imagine there are no piracy or terrorism yet on this part of the world. Moreover, Arctic route will also allow for, let's say, diminished time of travel for many container ships. For example, as you can see on this map, the route is, let's say, a quarter or a third shorter depending on which route you take, and the most important and the shorter one is one that passes near Russia. Thus, the difficulty of planning this route, as at the time of the writing of this video, Russia is still an international pariah for Atlantis powers. However, the perspective of linking a huge market, namely Europe, with the biggest producers like China, is seen as an extremely interesting opportunity, less to see how each state will invest in the region. And despite Japan not being a country of the Arctic, it has already planned some policies toward Arctic, mostly scientific, but also commercially. As said earlier, it's invested for quite a long time in Russian Arctic, and at the moment we can also sort of imagine a waiting line in front of Russia to get better agreement. And perhaps this is also a reason why the US is so open to discussion with Russia, not only to end arms support to Ukraine, but also maybe to share the Arctic cake together. And unfortunately for Japan yet, not much has been accomplished, especially because of politics being extremely centered about local issues such as inflation or salaries or taxation, which has left many politicians out of the question. And the lack of political will, if at the moment is perhaps not as important as it could be another time, will perhaps prevent Japan from obtaining much from Arctic at the moment. However, there is one aspect where Japan, maybe like Canada, is in advance towards everyone, and this is international law. Former Minister of Foreign Affairs Kamikawa has declared that Arctic should be common good instead of something for everyone to fight on. And even though this is quite an idealistic view of Arctic, for Japan this is its way to push its interests in front of countries that have material superiority in front of it. Therefore, for Japan, it will be up to when and where does it choose its partner and how well it will be received on international scene. As you can imagine, if the melting of the ice sheets are catastrophic, other problems can appear with global warming, namely the melting of permafrost. One of the most dangerous effects is of course the release of methane in the atmosphere, but we can also identify other threats such as the release of dangerous bacteria and viruses that were trapped in ice for millions of years. This was the case with anthrax that was released. This has been a constant in human history, where the exploitation of new lands has often led to ecological and biological catastrophe. And if this was the case when Europeans arrived in America, this could be the case with human exploiting Arctic to an industrial level. Still, even though concerning, this is still a uncertain topic to say the least, and no government have taken any serious measures to mitigate the effects that permafrost melting would have on human populations. To continue on this idea of indifference, it is important to comprehend the vision states have of Arctic, which is for now exploitative, but can also be understood as not important not in the sense of resource and trade opportunities, but not important in the human sense. And unfortunately, Arctic has been quite the trash of many countries of the region, especially during the Cold War. As you can see on these images, the island of New Zembel was used as a test for the Tsar Bomba, which left immense amount of radiation in the region, not to mention that Soviet Union also used the place as a way to stock its nuclear waste. So this can be explained by a few factors. One of the first is that no dominant population actually populates Arctic. Most of it is populated by what's often dehumanized as tribes or indigenous people. To them, they lack civilization, basically. They are seen as hunter-gatherer and not sedentary civilized persons. This can also be understood through the prism of history, as not that much of Europe history is present in this area. Soviet Union, for example, was the first to map fully the region, whereas Russian Empire didn't really know what it was colonizing at the time of its Siberian expansion. And this could also be the case for non-coastal states, that they see Arctic as a sort of playground and not an actual place of living. And this is quite visible in attempts to seize Greenland from the US, where the population is quite ignored, and even if the population is quite few, there are only 4 million people living in the Arctic Circle. They still matter. So to sum up, it is important to remind that one of the threats to Arctic exploration and exploitation is the fact that its perception is not the one of a place of living, of a place present on Earth, but for its different characteristics, it is almost as understood as another planet. And this is by no coincidence. Still, this perception could lead to an extremely exploitative use of Antarctica, and especially regarding its resources, because it would be only seen as a dead zone, which is far from the case. And what's more unfortunate is that even with proper demonstration, I do not think that states are empathetic enough to fully seize the catastrophic damage they could inflict on a non-negligible part of mankind with their great plans. As you may have understood from this video, researching on Arctic, as interesting as it is far from a very uplifting topic to work on. Sometimes when you look at projects related to Arctic, it feels like mankind is having a fling forwards, like if we were trying to escape something, and that something could be ourselves. Scholar Jean-Baptiste Feroce proposed this idea of Thanatocene, which means era of death, and that completely fits. Instead of searching for solution to our current problem, governments of the world are instead trying to find something that could externalize their problem rather than fixing them. And Arctic completely embodies that idea. Using it will not replace any of our current activity. It will be just an accumulation like it has always been. And even this idea of a northern route won't totally replace Suez Canal route for a number of reasons, as mankind has an accumulative vision of itself where nothing really replaces everything, and you can see it almost in daily life. Coal was never replaced by nuclear energy, for example. So it's hard to be optimistic in that situation, but there are possibilities that should international law be respected, and this is the aim of Japan, that we could have at least some more positive outcomes, especially should fossil fuels be removed for many of these projects, which is unlikely, unfortunately. This is not the most joyful topic, but I hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next video.